You need to watch this if you crave chills down your spine. Welcome to Soul Studios. Here, true crime meets the unknown. Suspense lurks in every shadow, and supernatural forces whisper from the dark. We craft chilling, edge-of-your-seat short stories inspired by the eerie, the unexplained, and the most haunting mysteries. 3 new stories drop every week, each one darker than the last. Are you ready to step inside? Subscribe now before the next story finds you.
In The Haunting of Briar Glen, investigative journalist Emily Renner journeys to a decaying plantation house in rural Georgia to uncover the truth behind a sinister antique bed and the poltergeist said to be tied to it. What she expects to be a routine ghost story quickly unravels into a chilling descent into generational trauma, supernatural terror, and a tragic past that refuses to stay buried. As Emily confronts eerie manifestations, unexplained cold spots, and the sorrowful cries of a child in the night, she begins to piece together the heartbreaking story of Elijah, a 7-year-old boy lost to time and rage. But the deeper she digs, the closer she comes to a horrifying revelation. She isn't just an outsider investigating a haunting, she's part of it. This is a story of love, betrayal, unfinished justice, and the ghosts that live not just in old houses, but in our blood. If you crave haunting narratives, sinister twists, and stories that stay with you long after the screen fades to black, subscribe now. Hit the bell so you never miss the next tale, because some spirits don't just haunt houses, they haunt legacies.
I arrived at Briar Glen under a bruised purple sky, the Georgia sun sinking low behind endless rows of pine and oak. The narrow country road crunched under my tyres as I drove through tunnels of kudzu and wild ivy, the evening light casting long shadows that danced across the dusty windshield. Warm, heavy air seeped in through the car's open window. It smelled of damp earth and honeysuckle, a deceptively sweet welcome that did little to calm the unease growing in my chest. My name is Emily Renner, and I had come to this forgotten corner of rural Georgia on assignment. As a reporter for Southern Mysteries magazine, I prided myself on chasing down local legends and unexplained tales. Briar Glen was to be my latest story, a decaying 19th century estate with a reputation as storied as it was sinister. According to rumour, an antique 4-poster bed inside the house was haunted by a restless spirit. Some called it a poltergeist, others a curse. Either way, I knew it would make one hell of an article if I could keep my nerves steady enough to stay the night. My old sedan strained as I climbed the final hill. At the top, the trees parted, and there it was, Briar Glen. The house sat in a clearing like a lonely grand dame, its once white columns now peeling and grey, strangled by vines creeping up from the untended garden. My headlights swept across the facade, illuminating shattered shutters hanging at angles and windows clouded with age. The porch steps sagged with rot. In the fading daylight, the place looked forlorn and ominously silent except for the incessant droning of cicadas in the surrounding woods. A murder of crows perched along the roof's edge took flight as I approached, their caws echoing a ragged greeting. On the porch, a single figure awaited me. Mrs. Dalton, the local real estate agent who had given me access to the property, stood stiffly by the front door. She was a petite woman in her 60s, with steel-grey hair pulled into a tight bun. In the dim light, I could see the pinched expression on her face. Her lips pressed into a thin line as I stepped out of the car and waved. "Evening, Mrs. Dalton," I called, forcing cheer into my voice as I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat. The cooling air instantly prickled my skin with humidity and leftover heat. I tasted dust at the back of my throat from the long drive. Under the scent of moss and old wood, there was something else, an indefinable tinge of rot or mildew that made me swallow hard. Mrs. Dalton offered a curt nod. "Miss Renner," she replied, voice clipped. "You made it just before dark." She glanced at the sky nervously. I noticed her avoiding looking at the house directly, as if the sight pained her. "Just in time," I agreed. The truth was, I had timed my arrival to have at least a little daylight to settle in. Spending a night alone in an abandoned mansion was unsettling enough without having to fumble through it in total darkness from the outset. Mrs. Dalton handed me a large iron key, its teeth long and jagged. The metal was cold and rough in my palm. "It's the only key we have that still fits. The locks are original," she explained. "Electricity's been turned on as you requested, but I'm not sure how reliable the old wiring is. I left a lantern and some candles in the front parlour for you, just in case." Her attempt at professional detachment did not hide the tremor in her hand as she passed the key to me. I realised she was eager to leave, perhaps before nightfall. "Thank you. I appreciate it," I said. She hesitated, then added, "I left bottled water and some sandwiches on the kitchen counter. There's no telling if the well water is any good, and I didn't want you going hungry out here." In her tone, I caught a note of pity, like I was a condemned prisoner receiving a last meal. "That's very kind," I said softly, meeting her eyes. "I know this isn't a usual request." Mrs. Dalton pursed her lips. Finally, she exhaled and looked up at the faded facade of Briar Glen. "I don't suppose it is," she murmured, almost to herself. In the amber glow of sunset, I saw goosebumps on her forearms. As we stood there, a sudden breeze sighed through the trees, rustling the overgrown rose bushes that flanked the house. It carried a surprising chill that raised the hairs on the back of my neck despite the warm summer evening. Mrs. Dalton wrapped her arms around herself. "The sooner I get home, the better," she muttered. She stepped off the porch, clearly ready to depart. "I trust you'll be all right for the night, Miss Renner. Tomorrow morning I'll return at 8 to check in, and to let you out if need be." She forced a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. I smiled back, trying not to show my own nerves. "I'll be fine. I've spent nights in old places before." I hoisted my canvas duffel onto my shoulder. It carried my essentials: a notebook, voice recorder, camera, a change of clothes, a pocket flashlight, and my grandmother's rosary, an impulsive addition I wasn't eager to advertise. Mrs. Dalton paused by her car. "Well then, good night. And Miss Renner?" "Yes?" I turned to face her fully. She hesitated, one hand on her car door. Her expression had softened slightly, worry creasing her brow. "Lock the door behind me and try to get some rest. You look like you could use it. Briar Glen can be." She trailed off, choosing her words carefully. "It can be unsettling, even for the bravest of us." I understood the unspoken warning. I'll keep that in mind. With nothing more to say, she nodded and ducked into her vehicle. I watched as the real estate agent's car turned and disappeared down the dirt drive, red taillights glowing between the dark trunks of oak trees until they were gone. Silence closed in around me, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of crickets and the distant croak of frogs from a nearby creek. Dusk was almost fully upon us. The last purplish remnants of daylight clung to the sky. Alone now, I faced the ancient house. I swallowed the lump rising in my throat and turned the heavy key in the lock. The mechanism groaned before yielding with a loud click. The front door swung inward with a drawn-out creak of hinges, releasing a breath of stale, cool air from the depths of the house. The smell of abandonment wafted out, dust, wood rot, and something sour I couldn't place. The odour slithered into my nose and mouth. I grimaced at the taste of mould on my tongue. Stepping inside, I fumbled for a light switch. My fingers found a bakelite knob on the wall and flicked it. To my relief, a tarnished chandelier in the foyer sputtered to life, its bulbs casting a weak yellow glow that barely reached the corners of the wide front hall. Shadows pooled in the high corners of the ceiling, and the far end of the hall disappeared into darkness where the light failed. I set my bag down on the dusty marble floor and closed the door behind me, remembering Mrs. Dalton's advice to lock it. The bolt slid into place with an unnerving thunk that echoed through the empty rooms beyond. I was sealed in now, alone with the silence and gloom. For a moment I just stood there listening to my own breathing and the creaking, settling sounds an old house makes. Wood gently popping as it adjusts to temperature, a faint drip of water from somewhere, the sigh of the breeze outside against the eaves. My heartbeat was loud in my ears. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, tasting the stale air. "Get a grip, Emily," I whispered to myself. My voice was swallowed by the foyer's space, offering no reply. I could do this. I'd investigated supposedly haunted places before, a deserted hospital, a dilapidated schoolhouse, a crumbling plantation. This was part of the job, stepping into the stories I wanted to tell. Yet something about Briar Glen felt different. The air itself seemed charged, as if the house was aware of my presence. Watching. waiting. I shook off the thought and retrieved the lantern Mrs. Dalton mentioned from a small entryway table. It was an old-fashioned oil lantern, already filled. A box of matches sat beside it. She'd also left a heavy flashlight and a small bag of candles. I was touched by the thoroughness of her care package, even as I wondered if it came from genuine kindness or her own fear of this place. With lantern and flashlight in hand, I ventured further inside, each step kicking up tiny swirls of dust in the fading chandelier light. The wooden floorboards were scuffed and dull under a film of neglect. My footsteps echoed softly as I walked into the parlour on the right. The front parlour was draped in shadow and melancholy. The remains of a once elegant room lay in decay, a grand piano in the corner, its lid closed and keys probably long out of tune. A set of high-backed chairs with velvet upholstery, now moth-eaten and faded to a sickly green, a cold fireplace with a cracked marble mantel. Above the mantel hung a large gilt-framed mirror, blackened with age so that only a vague reflection could be seen. When I raised my flashlight, dust motes sparkled in its beam like errant fireflies. Along one wall were built-in bookshelves, many of the shelves empty, though a few old books lay scattered and open, spines broken. The entire room smelled of mildew and time, like an antique store long sealed. The air had a damp chill, unusual for a Georgian summer night. I rubbed my arms to ward off the goosebumps that prickled my skin again. As I stood there absorbing the atmosphere, I caught a faint whiff of something that didn't belong, something floral like lavender or lilac cutting through the mustiness. It was fleeting. As soon as I noticed it, it was gone. Perhaps wildflowers from outside carried on the draft? I made a mental note of it nonetheless. The centrepiece of my interest, of course, was the infamous bed, though I hadn't seen it yet. According to the scant research I'd managed before coming, the bed was an antique four-poster that still stood in one of the upstairs bedrooms, likely the master. Local legend had it that a restless spirit was tied to that bed, and strange occurrences had driven away more than one previous occupant of Briar Glen. The skeptic in me reminded me that ghost stories often got inflated over time. The journalist in me was hungry to find out the truth behind the tales, but first I needed to set up a base for the night. I decided the front parlour, close to the exit, would be my camp. I unrolled my sleeping bag onto one of the less tattered rugs by the fireplace. It felt safer than braving an upstairs bedroom right off the bat. I could investigate the bed and the rest of the house once I was settled. After arranging my things, I walked back to the foyer and peeked through a doorway on the opposite side. There I found a dining room with a long mahogany table beneath a dusty chandelier. The remains of a candelabra stood at its centre, wax drippings frozen like pale icicles. Beyond that, through a swing door, was the kitchen. I found the sandwiches and water Mrs. Dalton left in a neat brown bag on a counter. The kitchen was basic, probably updated in the 1950s based on the checkered linoleum floor, and it smelled faintly of mouse droppings and old cooking grease. Wrinkling my nose, I grabbed the provisions and headed back to the parlour, where the air felt marginally fresher. I ate by lantern light, the silence so complete that I was acutely aware of each bite, each rustle of the sandwich wrapper. The ham and cheese tasted bland, my mouth still dry from nerves. I washed it down with water that was already lukewarm. The whole time I kept straining to hear something beyond the crackle of the lantern flame and my own chewing, something, anything, out of the ordinary. But there was nothing yet. Dusk surrendered to night. Through the parlour's tall windows, I saw the last glow vanish, replaced by the moonless darkness of a country night. With no nearby city, the stars were brilliant pinpricks in the black sky, but their light did not penetrate inside. I felt the weight of the old house pressing in, the darkness thick and intimate. I knew I should start my exploration soon, while I still had the nerve. My plan was to survey each room, talk into my recorder about any impressions, and of course spend time by the antique bed to see if the legends held any truth. Perhaps I'd capture evidence, photographs or audio to accompany my article. Before leaving the parlour, I stoked my courage with a deep breath. The air entering my lungs tasted of dust and something metallic like the tang of old pipes. I picked up my flashlight and lantern and stepped back into the hall. "Hello!" I called gently, feeling a little foolish speaking to nothing. My voice bounced off the walls. "Is anyone here with me?" I waited, half expecting, half hoping for a response. None came, only the muffled echo of my own words dissolving into the stillness. I made my way toward the grand staircase at the end of the hall. The beam of my flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing walls decorated with framed portraits and landscapes coated in grime. The eyes of painted people, long dead no doubt, peered out at me from shadowed faces. I felt a strange prickling on my neck, like I was truly being watched by those ancestral ghosts. I tried to dismiss it as an overactive imagination. The staircase was a sweeping curve of carved wood. I tested the first step, which groaned but held. Carefully I ascended, the wood protesting under each footfall. The lantern light jittered, sending flickering shadows slithering up the walls. I ran my hand along the banister. The wood was smooth, but covered in a thick layer of dust that felt soft and slightly greasy under my fingertips. A spider's web brushed my cheek, invisible in the dimness. I recoiled and wiped at my face, heart jumping at the unexpected touch. At the landing, the hallway split in two directions. To the left, darkness swallowed a corridor leading presumably to guest rooms or servant quarters. To the right, double doors stood partly ajar, likely the master bedroom where the antique bed waited. A cool draught wafted from that direction, carrying a faint scent that made me pause. It was the delicate aroma of lavender again, stronger this time, like perfume lingering in the air. Lantern raised, I followed the scent to the master bedroom door and pushed it open. The hinges whined sharply. Inside, the room was eerily preserved in time. My lantern illuminated the massive four-poster bed dominating the centre. Even in the dim light, I could see it was a magnificent piece of craftsmanship, carved mahogany posters twisting up toward a canopy frame, and a headboard with an intricately carved motif of vines and roses. A moth-eaten canopy drape hung from the frame, stirring gently, though I felt no breeze now. The bed was made up with a thin layer of dust coating the once fine quilt. As I stepped closer, the wooden floor chilled my feet through my shoes. It was markedly colder in here than the hallway, as if I had stepped into a cellar. I shivered involuntarily, clutching the lantern with both hands. "Is this where you are?" I whispered under my breath, not entirely sure who I meant. The haunted bed, the ghost itself? My words trembled in the quiet. A sudden thump sounded behind me. I spun around, heart leaping. My flashlight beam caught nothing but an armoire and a high-backed chair in the corner. The chair's worn floral upholstery seemed to stare back innocently. I held my breath, ears straining. The silence returned, heavier than before. Probably just the house settling, I told myself. Old homes had their creaks and pops. Still, I moved the flashlight slowly around the room. The pale beam revealed peeling wallpaper with a faded toil pattern of pastoral scenes. On a small vanity by the window, an old brush and hand mirror sat as if waiting for their owner's return. Cobwebs stretched between the vanity's legs. There was a wardrobe and a tall armoire opposite the bed, both doors closed. In the far corner loomed an ornate wooden crib. Or was it a cradle? I stepped closer to confirm, my pulse quickening. Yes, it was a small crib, its mattress long gone, a blanket still draped over the side. That detail hadn't been in any of the notes I read. Briar Glen's legend mentioned a spirit, but not a child. A chill that had nothing to do with the air ran through me. If a crib was here, had there been a child in this house? Possibly the child of the family who lived here in the 1800s? Questions churned in my mind, excitement and dread mixing. If true, it could be a key to understanding this haunting. I reached out to touch the old blanket, and as I did, I noticed my hand was trembling. The fabric disintegrated at my light touch, startling me. I pulled back quickly, and as I did, I heard a soft clink. My lantern's glass rattling against the metal frame from my unsteady grip. In the hush, another sound emerged, a faint scuttling from within the walls. Probably mice or rats making homes in the wainscoting. I exhaled, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Though nerves danced along my spine, I forced myself to approach the bed. This was what I'd come for, after all. Cautiously, I placed a hand on one of the posters. The wood felt cold, even through the film of dust. The craftsmanship up close was stunning. Hand-carved roses so detailed I could almost smell their petals, climbing vines that entwined the length of the posts. At the headboard, 2 carved cherubs peeked out from a wreath of carved briar roses. Briar Glen, named for the roses, perhaps? The irony of naming an estate for a tangle of thorns was not lost on me. I withdrew my hand, leaving a clear print in the dust on the poster. The idea of lying on this bed, even briefly, made my skin crawl, but I felt drawn to inspect it further. I set the lantern on the floor and knelt to peer under the bed frame, my flashlight illuminating the darkness beneath. The space below the bed was empty, except for more dust and a stray porcelain doll missing its head. I grimaced. The doll's tiny body lay askew, one arm outstretched, as if reaching for something. I gently nudged it with the flashlight and watched it roll into shadow. The image was unsettling, and I couldn't shake the sense that I was being watched from the darkness under that bed. Standing again, I brushed off my jeans and decided I had seen enough here for now. The chill was seeping into my bones, and the silence of the big bedchamber felt increasingly oppressive. My plan was to return downstairs, record my initial observations, and perhaps make a more thorough sweep of the house after a short break. As intrigued as I was by the crib and what it implied, I needed to regroup and steady my nerves. I made my way back into the hallway. As I did, I felt a faint current of cold air at my back, as if something or someone had passed by. I stopped and turned the flashlight behind me, aiming it back into the master bedroom. Nothing moved. But in that instant, I caught a scent again, stronger than ever, the unmistakable fragrance of lavender, mixed with something mustier like old decay. It lingered around me, and then just as before, it vanished. I rubbed my arms and hurried toward the stairs. It's fine, it's just a draft, I told myself, just the night air moving through these halls. But a quiet voice in my mind whispered that perhaps I was not as alone as I thought. Back in the foyer, I left the lantern on a side table and made sure the front door was indeed locked and bolted. The solid feel of the bolt was mildly reassuring. Retreating to the parlour where my things were, I finally allowed myself to sit down on the edge of my sleeping bag. My legs felt shaky. The exploration had been nerve-wracking, more so than I expected. I pulled out my digital voice recorder and began speaking quietly into it, describing everything. The layout of the house, the state of the rooms, the curious cold spots and lavender scent in the master bedroom, the presence of a crib, and the possibly headless doll beneath the bed. Hearing my own voice steadied me somewhat. It was the voice of a reporter, clinical and composed, as if documenting someone else's experience. Yet as I spoke, I couldn't ignore the anxiety coiled in my stomach. The house was so quiet now. Too quiet. I found myself whispering, as though afraid I might wake something with my voice. My ears strained for any hint of a response in the pauses between my sentences on the recorder. Nothing. Only the crackle of the lantern and the distant hoot of an owl outside. After I finished my verbal notes, I set the recorder and flashlight by my pillow, just in case. It was fully dark, and I realised how exhausted I was from the journey and tension. Checking my phone, I saw there was no signal. Not surprising this far out and with old, thick walls. The time read 11:47 p.m. The night had only just begun. I lay down on the sleeping bag, lantern turned low beside me, its warm glow flickering across the parlour's peeling wallpaper. The floor was hard and unforgiving beneath the thin padding, but I didn't dare use any of the mildewed old furniture to sleep on. The thought of lying on that antique bed upstairs. No, not yet at least. Perhaps not ever. As I got as comfortable as I could, I continued to listen to the house. Sometimes old houses come alive at night with sounds. Water through pipes, wood contracting in the cool air, wind finding its way through cracks. I tried to lull myself by identifying each noise. The steady drip I'd heard earlier continued, probably from a leaky faucet. The occasional skitter, rodents in the walls, the groan, just the foundation or beams settling. My rational mind offered answers. Still, with every creak, my muscles tensed. My senses felt heightened, skin prickling at the slightest shift in the air. Eventually, fatigue began to overtake adrenaline. My eyelids grew heavy. The lantern flame danced, casting moving shadows like figures along the walls, but I was too tired to find them frightening anymore. My last waking thought was a determination to delve deeper into the history of this place come morning. Perhaps in town I could find records or news clippings about Briar Glen's past inhabitants. especially if a child had once lived and died here. I drifted off with that thought, the taste of dust on my tongue and the scent of lavender phantom in my nostrils. My dreams, when they came, were uneasy and fleeting, of distant music and a child's laughter echoing down long corridors. I did not expect to sleep deeply, and indeed I didn't. It must have been only an hour or two later when I woke with a start, heart pounding in the darkness. I wasn't sure why at first, what had yanked me from the edge of slumber, until I heard it. Somewhere above me, from the second floor, came a distinct sound. It was the sound of a door slamming shut. The echo of the slam reverberated through the empty halls of Briar Glen and settled into silence once more. I sat upright, every nerve on edge, my breath caught in my throat. The house was dark. At some point, the lantern had sputtered out, leaving only glowing embers of the wick. As I fumbled for my flashlight with shaking hands, a cold certainty filled me. I was not alone here after all. I sat frozen in the darkness, clutching the flashlight with white-knuckled hands. My heart drummed in my ears as I strained to listen. The echo of the slamming door lingered in the still air, then dissipated into silence. No wind outside, no other signs of life, just the undeniable fact that something upstairs had moved on its own. A dozen rational explanations flashed through my mind. Perhaps a window left open had caused a draft, or an animal bumped something. But the upstairs windows I'd seen were all closed, and no animal could slam a door with that force. The conclusions left me either a trespasser or a ghost. Neither was comforting. Summoning courage from deep within, I pushed myself to stand. My legs wobbled. The floor felt icy on my bare feet. I had slipped off my shoes when lying down. I hastily shoved them back on, not wanting to wander the house unprotected even in that small way. With the flashlight beam cutting a narrow cone in front of me, I stepped out into the hallway. The house felt different now, charged with a palpable energy. I could almost feel eyes on me from the dark rooms above. The beam trembled as I directed it up the staircase. I had left the lantern in the foyer, its wick nearly extinguished. A thin wisp of smoke from the spent flame mixed with the musty smell, creating an acrid scent that stung my nose. I started up the stairs, one cautious step at a time, wincing as each board groaned under my weight. "Hello?" I called out softly, the attempt at bravery falling flat. My voice sounded small. At the top, I turned toward the master bedroom. The double doors at the end of the corridor were now shut tight. I was certain I had left them ajar, wide open in fact, when I'd fled the room earlier. Now they stood closed, silent sentinels concealing whatever lay beyond. I approached slowly. The air grew colder with each step until I could see my breath faintly when I exhaled. A chill sweat dampened the back of my neck. As I reached the doors, I noticed something new. Faint scratches marred the wood near the handle, as if someone with small hands had clawed at it. The metal knob was old-fashioned brass. I reached out and grasped it, feeling an intense coldness, almost like touching ice. For a moment, I hesitated. Some primal part of me didn't want to open that door again, but my reporter's curiosity and stubbornness won out. I twisted the knob and pushed. The door resisted, as though caught on something. I gave a harder shove and it flew open, hitting the wall with a thud. My flashlight's beam sliced into the room. It was empty, at least empty of any intruder that I could see. The lantern light from the foyer cast a faint glow up the stairs behind me, but the master bedroom lay in deep shadow beyond the reach of that feeble light. I stepped inside, the cold air wrapping around me like a frigid cloak. My eyes swept the room, trying to discern what might have moved. Nothing appeared changed at first glance. The armoire door was still closed, the vanity undisturbed, the cradle in the corner shadowed and still. Then my light fell upon the bed and I caught my breath. On the pale, dusty quilt, there was a disturbance. The film of dust that had lain uniformly across its surface was smeared as though something had brushed across it. I edged closer, my mouth dry. It looked exactly as if someone had sat on the side of the bed. The outline of a seated figure was imprinted in the dust, 2 small handprints next to it, pressed into the quilt's surface. My stomach lurched at the sight. The handprints were tiny, far too small to be an adult's. They looked like the prints of a child. A cold draught suddenly rippled through the canopy drapes, making them sway. The lavender scent flooded my senses again, strong and forlorn. Mixed with it, underneath, was the unmistakable smell of something rotten. The juxtaposition of sweet and foul made my head swim. I covered my nose and mouth with one hand, my own breath harsh and loud against my palm. "Who's there?" I managed to croak, outshining the flashlight around wildly. Its beam jittered across the walls and ceiling. For an instant, I thought I saw a shape near the cradle, a darker patch in the blackness, the size of a child crouching. But when I jerked the light back, it was gone. Only an empty corner with that old cradle and the blanket hanging limp. My heart hammered against my ribs. Think logically, I ordered myself, but logic was rapidly receding in the face of what I was witnessing. No matter how I tried to twist it, dust did not shift itself into the shape of a seated child, nor did doors slam themselves shut. I inched toward the bed, compelled to investigate the prints more closely despite my fear. Kneeling beside the mattress, I gingerly touched the depression. The dust was disturbed there, indeed. And as I ran my fingers over the small handprint, I noted the impression was deeper than it should be, as if whatever made it had been heavy enough to compress the mattress slightly. The dust on my fingertips smelled musty, ordinary, but the air above the bed was freezing cold. As I knelt, a soft sound reached my ears, making me freeze. It was a gentle whimper, almost too soft to catch, the sound of a child softly sobbing. It seemed to come from just behind me. I whirled around on my knees, shining the flashlight toward the doorway in the corners of the room. "Hello? Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The maternal instinct in me overtook my fear for a moment. If a child was here, lost or hiding, they might be afraid. The sobbing stopped abruptly, cut off as if it had never been. Only the ringing silence remained, and the echo of my own voice asking pointless questions of an empty room. A surge of emotion caught me off guard. An aching sadness welled up from that silence, prickling behind my eyes. The sound of that cry had been so desolate, so full of pain. It tugged at something in me. I thought of my own mother, how I had cried in her arms at my father's funeral years ago, feeling small and terrified. The memory came unbidden, but with it empathy. Ghost or not, someone's child had wept with that same despair here. That thought steeled me. I stood, backing slowly out of the room. I decided against closing the door this time, not wanting another slam, but I did whisper into the darkness, "I'm sorry you're upset. I'm going downstairs now. I'll come back later, I promise." The words felt absurd, leaving my lips, talking to what might be thin air, but it felt like the right thing to do, as one would calm a frightened child. Clutching the flashlight, I retreated down the stairs as quietly as possible. Every hair on my arms was standing on end. I made it back to the parlour and quickly lit one of the thick candles with a match, not trusting the lantern fuel after it had gone out. The warm glow was a welcome friend, pushing back the dark corners of the room. I did not dare try to sleep again. Instead, I sat on my sleeping bag, my back against the wall where I could see both the hallway door and the windows. The candle flickered, its flame dancing whenever a draught slithered through the parlour. I wrapped myself in a light blanket from my bag and kept the flashlight at my side, eyes fixed on the doorway. I waited. Minutes crept by, the silence only broken by occasional night noises, the crickets outside, the groan of a beam, a rustle of some creature in the walls. After a while, even those sounds faded or became familiar enough not to set my heart racing. There were no more slams, no more cries, only the oppressive quiet of the old house, which now felt less empty than it had before. I must have drifted into a light sleep out of sheer exhaustion, because I suddenly became aware of pale dawn light filtering through the sheer curtains of the parlour. I blinked, stiff and bleary-eyed, unsure for a moment where I was. The candle had burned itself out, leaving a puddle of wax on the plate I'd set it on. My flashlight lay untouched at my side. The memory of the night rushed back and I jolted fully awake. It was early morning, judging by the milky quality of light, perhaps around 6 a.m. I had survived the night, but not without incident. Proof of that still waited upstairs. A part of me wondered if it had really happened, or if my mind had concocted it in a half-dream state. I needed to see in daylight. I stood, joints protesting from sleeping on the hard floor. Every muscle felt tense and knotted. My mouth was cotton dry and tasted of stale fear. I drank deeply from another water bottle and rubbed my face. The idea of going back to the master bedroom in the broad light of day felt less daunting. Ghosts, if that's what it was, tend to feel less threatening under the sun. I stepped into the hall and looked up the staircase. Weak morning light seeped from a dusty stained glass window on the landing, painting patterns on the floor. I slowly ascended once more, my footsteps echoing. At the top, the air was still cold, though not as frigid as last night. I hesitated at the master bedroom doorway, then forced myself to enter. The scene was much as I left it. No figure greeted me, and in the grey morning light that filtered through the room's tall windows, I could clearly see the dust disturbance on the bed. It was unmistakable and chilling, even more so now that I saw it without the distortions of flashlight and fear. A child's handprints, and more than two, I realised with a sinking feeling. There were actually 4 distinct little hand impressions in the dust, as if a child had crawled or shifted position. And the depression where it had sat was still visible in the centre of the mattress's top quilt. I circled the bed slowly. On the nightstand lay something I hadn't noticed in the dark. A small wooden toy, a spinning top with faded paint. I picked it up gingerly. It felt forlorn, as if it had waited decades to be played with. The edges were worn smooth by use long ago. How had I missed this before? Perhaps it had been inside the nightstand drawer and somehow fallen out, or been placed there later. I set the top down, shivers running through me. Near the foot of the bed, something caught my eye on the floor. A set of faint tracks in the dust, leading away toward the door. They were smudged, but looked like the scuffs a pair of small feet might leave. The sight made me swallow hard. It was one thing to think I'd imagined the sobbing. It was another to see physical evidence of something moving in the night. My gaze then drifted to the vanity. The mirror was cloudy, reflecting just vague shapes of the room. When I stepped closer, I noticed a mark in the dust on the vanity table's surface as well. Slowly I realised it was another handprint, the size of a child's hand, imprinted in the dust on the tabletop. The fingers were slender, the print clear, as if a child had stood tiptoe to look in the mirror and pressed a hand down for balance. A wave of tenderness and unease washed over me simultaneously. The idea of a child's spirit roaming this cold, empty house, climbing up to look in the mirror, thus perhaps expecting to see his mother behind him as children do, it made my chest ache. I gently lay my own hand over the small print, not touching the dust, but just aligning, feeling the comparison. It was much smaller than my hand. For a moment, I felt a lump in my throat as an emotional response took me by surprise. Whoever this child was, he must have been so lonely, so lost. And then, nearly as strong as the sadness, came anger. If a child's ghost was here, that meant a child likely died here. Why? How? The protective human part of me flared with the need to know what happened to him. And if he was the one tied to that bed, was it because something awful had happened there? I remembered the local rumours, a malicious poltergeist tied to an antique bed. No one had mentioned a child specifically in what I'd heard, only a presence. Poltergeists were often described as mischievous or malevolent spirits, sometimes of the young, their energy chaotic. But to me, nothing about those handprints or that sobbing felt mischievous. It felt heartbroken and frightened. Could the tales have twisted a scared child into a malicious poltergeist over the years? Or were there two spirits here, both the child and something darker? I was determined to find out. Leaving the master bedroom, I realised dawn had brightened into a clear morning. Sunlight was streaming more generously through the windows, bringing some life into the otherwise dead corridors. I decided to check the rest of the second floor by daylight to see if any other evidence of the nocturnal visitor remained. Most of the other rooms were empty bedrooms, stripped of furniture or containing only a few sheet-draped pieces. Dust and disuse blanketed everything. In one smaller room, which might have been a nursery given the pale yellow walls and painted stencils of rabbits along the border, I found a rocking chair. It was gently rocking back and forth in a sunbeam as if someone had just left it. My breath caught, but as I stepped closer, I saw the cause, a gentle breeze from a cracked window. I released a breathy laugh at my jumpiness. The breeze, however, carried a sound that froze me mid-step, a faint giggle, the laughter of a young boy echoing just beyond the doorway. It was so quick I wondered if I imagined it. I rushed to the hall, but no one was there. Only dust motes swirling in the shafts of light. Feeling unnerved but also strangely invigorated, because this was proof beyond doubt, I returned downstairs. It was nearing 7:30 and I expected Mrs. Dalton might arrive soon. In truth, I was eager for some human company after the long night. I splashed my face with water from the bottle since plumbing wasn't on and ate a few bites of a second sandwich for breakfast, though my appetite was meagre. The coffee in my thermos from yesterday was long cold, but I drank it anyway, the bitter taste at least waking me up. While waiting, I jotted down notes in my journal by hand. My recorder had a limited battery and I wanted to save it for interviews later. Writing steadied me. I detailed the slam, the handprints, the sobbing. Putting it in words made it feel more concrete, like evidence logged in an investigation. This was not just a ghost story, it was potentially a real tragedy that left a very real imprint. At a few minutes past 8, I heard the crunch of tyres on gravel outside. Folding away the journal, I hurried to the front door. Daylight spilled in as I unlocked and opened it, stepping out onto the porch. Mrs. Dalton's car was parked a cautious distance from the house, as if she didn't want to get too close. She emerged slowly. I must have looked to sight, rumpled clothes, dark circles under my eyes, because her own eyes widened with concern as she approached. "Good morning," she greeted. Her voice was gentle, perhaps expecting me to be shaken. "Morning," I replied, managing a smile. I realised I was genuinely glad to see her. "Right on time?" She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, looking up at me searchingly. "How was your night, Miss Renner?" she asked carefully. I considered how much to tell her. If I blurted out that I had possibly communed with a ghost child, she might think me crazy, or worse, revoke my access. But I also sensed she might have her own suspicions about this place. "It was eventful," I said slowly. "This is quite the house you've got here." Her expression tightened. "I did try to warn you it can be unsettling. We've had a few incidents whenever we showed it to potential buyers." She glanced at the upstairs windows, perhaps imagining what might be watching from within. "Incidents?" I stepped down to her level, curious. "What kind of incidents?" Mrs. Dalton shifted uneasily. "Strange noises, mostly. Cold spots in the master bedroom that spooked one couple real bad. And one time I could have sworn I heard someone running down the hall, but no one was there. It's why the owner finally decided to just sell the furnishings and leave the place empty. Hard to find a buyer when rumours spread." She paused. "Why do you ask? Did something happen last night?" I met her gaze, trying to decide if honesty would yield more help. I opted for a measured version of the truth. "I did hear some noises," I admitted, "and I think I felt that cold spot in the master. Nothing I couldn't handle." I attempted a confident shrug. She didn't look convinced by my nonchalance. In the soft morning light, her face was lined with sympathy or worry. "This old place has its ghosts," she said quietly, then added, "Figuratively speaking, of course." She cleared her throat. "Would you like me to stay for a while? I could help tidy up, make it more comfortable if you're set on another night." It sounded like she just didn't want to leave me alone again without at least offering support. "That's kind of you, Mrs. Dalton," I responded, touched by the offer. "But I think it's best I dig into the house's history today. Maybe the town has records or stories that could help explain." I trailed off, not wanting to say, "Explain what I saw." Her eyes flickered with something that looked like relief. Perhaps staying inside was the last thing she actually wanted to do. The county courthouse in Millhaven has archives, and there's the Historical Society. If you're looking into history, those would be the places. There's also an old-timer, Mr. Withers, who runs a little museum out of the old train depot. He knows more local law than anyone, though you'll have to pry it out of him. She walked with me to her car to fetch a thermos of fresh coffee she'd thoughtfully brought. As she poured me a cup, blessedly hot and strong, with a scent that cut through the lingering mustiness in my nose, I decided to press a bit more. "Do you know anything about the family who originally lived here? The ones who owned that antique bed upstairs, for instance?" I watched her face as I sipped from a paper cup she handed me. Mrs. Dalton frowned slightly. "Not too much, just bits and pieces. The estate used to belong to a family named Walker, I think, back in the mid-1800s. The story goes that the lady of the house passed away, and that her death was rather sudden. After that, well, tragedy seemed to follow. Folks around here have long whispered that something ain't right with Briar Glen. My heart skipped. This aligned with what I suspected. The lady of the house, did she die in her bedroom? In that bed? I couldn't say for sure, dear. She looked apologetic. Those are just stories passed down. Some say she died giving birth, others say it was an illness, maybe even consumption, and I've heard one tale that suggested something more violent. She hesitated at that, as if unsure she should continue. I leaned in, gently encouraging. Please, any detail helps. Violent how? Mrs. Dalton lowered her voice, even though we were quite alone. There was a rumour that her husband had a hand in it, that their relationship had soured, and one night screams were heard from the house. The next morning she was found dead in that bed. But you know how legends are, they feed on gossip. Nothing was proven. In fact, I believe the official record might list something mundane like fever as the cause. The husband left town some time after, which only added fuel to folks' imaginations. As she spoke, I felt a chill, not from any ghostly presence, but from the tale itself. A woman dead in the bed, a husband with possible blood on his hands, and perhaps a child left motherless. I finished my coffee, the warmth doing little to dispel the cold forming in my gut. Thank you, I said. I think I need to verify some of this at the courthouse or museum like you suggested. Knowing what happened could help explain, well, the atmosphere here. Yes, she nodded sagely. Sometimes the past leaves an imprint, and if terrible things happened, sometimes it's like a stain that won't wash out. Realising her own morbid words, she cleared her throat and mustered a brighter tone. I'll be in town at the office if you need anything, and I'll come back again this evening unless you'd rather I didn't. Perhaps just on call would be fine, I said. I was thinking that if I stayed another night, I might not want her risking any fright. Plus, a part of me knew I'd get better evidence alone. I appreciate you checking on me, truly. I'll be careful. She gave me a long look, then reached out and patted my shoulder. You seem a sensible young woman. Just don't underestimate this place. Sometimes it's not just what we see or hear, but how it makes us feel that can be the real danger. Her gaze held mine, conveying a depth of concern. I nodded. I understand. With that, Mrs. Dalton left in her car, promising to have her cell phone on her if I needed help. I watched the dust trail of her car fade down the road and found myself oddly reluctant to re-enter the house now that I had left its walls. The morning was bright, cicadas already buzzing in the grass. It would be easy to lose myself in this gentle summer day and forget the spectres of the night. But I couldn't forget the handprints and the sobbing. They drew me back in as surely as a rope around my waist. I stepped back inside Briar Glen, closing the door gently behind me. The air immediately felt cooler and the noise from outside dampened, replaced by the house's heavy hush. I packed up my notebook, camera, and a fresh voice recorder tape, determined to gather facts from town. As I passed the staircase on my way out, I looked up to the second floor. The master bedroom door stood open now where I left it. In the shadow beyond, I thought I saw a flicker of movement, like someone ducking out of sight. But in daylight, with courage bolstered by purpose, I forced a smile in that direction. I'll be back later, I said softly. I'm going to learn about you, I promise. Only silence answered, yet I felt a strange calm in saying it aloud. Then I turned, locked the front door behind me and set out for Millhaven to unearth the secrets of Briar Glen. The drive into Millhaven took me past cotton fields and weathered barns, the morning sun glaring off the cracked windshield of my sedan. Despite the bright day, my thoughts were clouded with the weight of what I'd experienced and what Mrs. Dalton had told me. A woman's sudden death, a husband who might have gotten away with murder, a child left behind. The pieces were fitting together to form a tragic picture, and I suspected that picture was far from complete. Millhaven turned out to be a modest town with one main street lined by brick facades, a diner, a feed store, a public library housed in a former schoolhouse, and the county courthouse with its white columns and a statue of a Confederate soldier out front. The air smelled of fresh-cut grass and distant barbecue, a stark contrast to the stale decay of Briar Glen. I decided to start at the courthouse, hoping to find any official records on Briar Glen or the Walker family. Inside, an aging clerk directed me to the archives in the basement, where decades of ledgers, deeds, and local newspapers were stored on microfiche. The archive room was small and stuffy. I spent a couple of hours combing through property records first. A thick, leather-bound ledger revealed that Briar Glen, listed under its original name Walker Estate, Briar Glen Plantation, was built in 1856 by one Thomas Walker. He had acquired several hundred acres and a fine house was erected, likely financed by a cotton fortune. I traced the ownership. After Thomas, the property went to an Elias Walker in 1876, then was sold out of the family by 1880 to a distant cousin. That caught my eye. Who was Elias? Another family member I hadn't heard of yet. A son, perhaps, or a brother. The name was similar to Elijah, a common name of the era. My mind snagged on it. Could that be the son's name, misspelled or abbreviated? The ledger entry was faded. It might indeed say Elijah, but look like Elias due to old-fashioned script. Elias, or Elijah Walker, 1876. That would align with Mrs. Dalton's mention that the husband left and tragedy followed. Perhaps the child had inherited the estate after the father left town, meaning the father relinquished it or was forced to. I jotted down notes, my pen scratching loudly in the hush. The next thing I looked for were death records. The clerk had pointed me to a cabinet of old death certificates on file. With some searching, I found one for Catherine Walker, dated April 2nd, 1874. Cause of death listed as apoplexy, a term often used at the time for a sudden death like stroke or aneurysm. My eyebrows rose. That didn't fit the rumours at all. If she'd been murdered, surely it wouldn't be called apoplexy unless someone had covered it up. There was no death certificate for Thomas Walker in the county, implying he didn't die here, but I did find a certificate for Elijah Walker, age 7, dated September 1875. Cause of death, consumption, the old name for tuberculosis. My heart squeezed at the confirmation. Elijah. The child had a name now, written in spidery ink, so he had lived for over a year after his mother's death. The certificate listed the informant as J. Withers, neighbour, possibly an ancestor of old Mr. Withers, the local historian. The fact that a neighbour reported the death suggested Thomas wasn't around by then. Indeed, if the estate passed to Elijah in 1876, as indicated by the deed ledger, perhaps Thomas was legally declared absent or dead? Or maybe Elijah had a guardian who oversaw the estate until it was sold. I snapped a few photos of the documents with my phone for reference. The notion that Elijah died of illness was both a relief and a new sorrow. If true, he hadn't been directly killed by anyone, but he had suffered an agonizing disease without his mother, possibly without his father either. Did he die in that house, in that very bed? Consumption often confined people to bed in their final weeks. A chill crept over me despite the stuffy room. A child slowly wasting away in that bed, likely crying out for a mother who would never answer. If any spirit had reason to be restless, Elijah did. Still, part of me questioned the consumption story. It could be true, or it could have been a polite cover for something else. Perhaps the child simply wasted from neglect or grief. Or a dark thought, could Thomas have harmed his own son too before fleeing? I doubted that. If he was cruel enough to kill his wife, perhaps, but it seemed he had left. If Thomas had still been in the picture in late 1874, I suspect local gossip would have pointed fingers at him for Elijah's decline too, which I hadn't heard. More likely the child truly fell ill. My next stop was the library a few blocks away. The librarian, a cheerful woman in a floral blouse, helped me access the microfilm of old newspapers. I scoured issues from 1874 and 1875. I found a small obituary notice for Catherine Walker. Mrs. Catherine Walker, beloved wife of Thomas Walker of Briar Glen, passed away suddenly at home. She leaves behind a young son. The community mourns her loss. There were no follow-up news stories or scandalous hints, just a respectful, sparse note. If people whispered about foul play, they didn't do it in print. Then I struck gold in an 1875 newspaper, a brief article titled "Tragedy Lingers at Briar Glen." My pulse quickened as I read. Little Elijah Walker, age 7, only son of the late Catherine Walker, has passed after a prolonged illness. His passing comes just 1 year after his mother's untimely death. The boy had been in the care of relatives following the departure of his father, Mr. Thomas Walker, from the area. Locals speak in hushed tones of a curse upon Briar Glen, as tragedy has struck the once happy home twice in quick succession. Thomas's departure was noted. There was no mention of suspicion of murder in the article, likely deemed libelous for the paper to print without proof, but the phrasing suggested the community noted the dark pattern. A curse, they said, or maybe just the curse of one man's evil actions catching up to his family. I printed copies of the articles. Now I had confirmation of the names and sequence of events. Catherine died in 1874 in that bed. Thomas left town afterward. Elijah died in 1875, likely in that house under the care of relatives, perhaps an aunt or grandmother. And by 1876, the estate changed hands, perhaps sold off by those relatives or by a bank. The question remained, what exactly happened on the night of Catherine's death? And did Thomas truly get away with murder? Officially, she had a sudden illness, but screams were heard, according to Mrs. Dalton's law. I needed a more personal account. That meant I needed to talk to Mr. Withers. If a Withers was the informant on Elijah's death, that family might have been neighbours or friends of the Walkers. Perhaps stories or even diaries survived in that family line. I found the old train depot turned museum easily, a quaint red brick building by some disused tracks with a sign reading Millhaven Historical Museum. Inside, dusty exhibits of farming tools and black and white photos of early town life adorned the walls. Behind a glass counter sat a thin, balding man with bushy white eyebrows and a long nose, absorbed in a crossword puzzle. This had to be Mr. Withers. He glanced up at me through wire-rimmed glasses. "Morning? Need any help?" he drawled. His voice was surprisingly deep for his frail appearance. I introduced myself and explained I was researching Briar Glen and the Walker family tragedy for an article. At the mention of Briar Glen, his eyebrows arched, and a spark of recognition lit in his eyes. Briar Glen, eh? Not many folks ask about that old place nowadays. Haunted, you know, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. "I've heard," I replied with a small smile. "I actually spent last night there." That made him set the crossword aside. "Did you now?" He leaned forward. "See anything interesting?" I decided honesty was best here. I might have. Enough that I want to know the real history. I have reason to believe the ghost might be a child. Perhaps Elijah Walker. Mr. Withers nodded slowly. "Ah, poor little Elijah. Yes. My great-grandfather, Jeremiah Withers, lived on the next farm over back then. He wrote about the night Miss Catherine died and the aftermath in some of his journals. We still have those entries." He motioned me to follow him to a back room that smelled of old paper and leather. My heart pounded with excitement. This was exactly what I needed. He opened a ledger, his great-grandfather's journal, dated 1870s, and flipped through yellowed pages filled with neat cursive. "Here," he said, pointing at a page. "March 30th, 1874. Jeremiah wrote an entry about hearing commotion at Briar Glen." I squinted at the faded ink, reading aloud softly. "Heard frightful screams from the direction of Briar Glen in the dead of night. Sounded like a woman in distress. Thought to ride over, but the screams ceased. Next day learned that Catherine Walker passed in the night. Thomas claimed she took a seizure. Strange bruises on her neck, some say. Sheriff made quiet inquiries, but nothing came of it. Thomas distraught, or so he seemed. God forgive me, but I have my doubts about that man. Little Elijah was screaming for his mama when we arrived in the morning." I felt a chill as the words confirmed what I suspected. Bruises on her neck, consistent with strangling or choking. It appeared Thomas had literally gotten away with murder, possibly because no one wanted to stir scandal without solid proof, or perhaps Thomas was influential enough to avoid charges. And poor Elijah. I imagined a 7-year-old boy finding his mother dead, perhaps at his father's hands. The heartbreak and terror that must have imprinted on his soul in that moment. No wonder his spirit could not rest. Mr. Withers turned a few pages. April 3rd, 1874. They buried Catherine today. A sad affair. Little Elijah clung to her coffin, sobbing. Thomas hardly looked at the boy. He's a changed man, dark-eyed and jumpy. He left straight after the burial, handed Elijah off to Catherine's sister from Savannah to care for him for now. Rumour is Thomas means to sell the estate and leave town. Folks don't say it aloud, but all think he's fleeing guilt. Indeed, Thomas wasted no time distancing himself. What a coward, I thought bitterly. He abandons his traumatized child and runs. We continued reading. The journals mentioned that Elijah's aunt stayed at Briar Glen for a while to care for him, but the boy's health deteriorated. By late 1874, he had a persistent cough, sign of TB or just stress. The final entry about them was in September 1875. Little Elijah is gone to be with his mama. Peace to his soul. They say he went quietly in his sleep after weeks of fever. Catherine's sister looked after him as best she could. They will bury him beside Catherine. Thomas has not returned, not even for his son's final days. I realised I was holding my breath as I read. I let it out shakily, trying not to let my voice quaver in front of Mr. Withers. Anger and sorrow warred within me. Elijah had been utterly forsaken by his surviving parent, left to die of sickness and heartbreak in the same room, possibly the same bed where his mother was murdered. It was a horror beyond any ghostly fright, a real one etched in the lives of these people. "Thank you, Mr. Withers," I said quietly after we had finished. "This is incredibly helpful and heartbreaking." The old man removed his glasses and polished them. His eyes were misty. "It is a sad tale. My pa passed these stories down too. They always said the boy's spirit never left that house. Too much sorrow bound him there. Some claimed to see him at the window or hear him playing at night, even a generation later." I thought of the giggle I heard near the rocking chair, the sobs in the night. "If he's there, I want to help him if I can," I found myself saying. Withers studied me. Help him? How does one help a ghost, I wonder? Maybe by uncovering the truth, telling his story, perhaps by confronting the one who wronged him. Even as I said it, I knew Thomas was long dead, but in some way I felt Elijah deserved justice, or at least acknowledgement. At the very least, he should know he's not alone, that people remember and care. Mr. Withers gave a sad smile. "You have a good heart, young lady. Just be careful. Not all spirits want help. Some just want to hold on to their anger. And Elijah, well, a child ghost, especially one that went through what he did, he might be more confused and angry than most. Poltergeist activity, they call it now, don't they?" "Yes, I've already seen a bit of that." I rubbed my forearm unconsciously, remembering the door slam. He nodded, returning the journal to its place. "If things get hairy, you might try talking to him. Some say spirits can hear our intentions. Tell him what you told me, that you want to help. He might listen." I thanked Mr. Withers profusely for his time and knowledge. Before I left, he rummaged in a drawer and handed me a photocopy of an old photograph. It was a portrait of a family, a man with stern features and proud posture, a lovely woman on a chair holding a small boy in her lap. "That's the Walkers, taken not long before Catherine's passing," he said. "Thought you might like to see it. Found it in our files. Someone donated it long ago." I stared at the image. Though age had faded it, I could make out Catherine's gentle face and Thomas's piercing dark eyes and thick moustache. The boy, Elijah, had a cherubic round face and a shy smile, hair a mop of dark curls. His eyes, I noticed, seemed a bit sad even in that posed family portrait. "You can keep the copy," Mr. Withers offered. I nodded gratefully and slipped it into my notebook. As I did, I had an odd sensation in my chest, a tightness, almost like déjà vu. Thomas's face in the photo, something about it tugged at me. I couldn't place why. Perhaps I'd seen a face like that in a history book, or... I shook it off. It was likely just the impact of putting faces to the names that unsettled me. Before noon, I had gathered everything I needed. My mind swirled with the information as I grabbed a quick bite at the local diner, barely tasting the chicken salad sandwich as I processed the tale. The anger I felt toward Thomas Walker surprised me in its intensity. I realised it touched a nerve, perhaps because I had lost my own father at a young age, albeit to natural causes. The idea of a parent willfully harming and abandoning their child was abhorrent and deeply affecting. I was also aware of a growing protectiveness I felt toward Elijah's spirit. Fear was still there, yes. What I experienced during the night had been terrifying. But armed with knowledge, I now felt more empathy than fear. That little boy's ghost had been branded a malicious poltergeist by local law, when in reality he was a hurt, frightened child who'd lost everything. His anger, if he had any, was understandable. I returned to Briar Glen in the early afternoon, parking under the arching pecan tree that shaded part of the front drive. The house looked less menacing in the daylight, though still forlorn. Cicadas hummed loudly in the heat, and a couple of swallowtail butterflies danced among the overgrown rose bushes. Inside, the air was stale and cool as before. I unlatched a few windows in the parlour and hall to let in fresh air and light. Sunbeams cut into the dusty interior, illuminating moats and making the silence feel less oppressive. I spread my collected documents on the dining table where light was best. The photocopies of the journal entries, the printed news clippings, the photo, my own notes. I read over them all again, solidifying the timeline and details in my mind. With each reread, my resolve strengthened. If Elijah's spirit was indeed here, I would let him know that I understood his story and that someone cared. Perhaps that could bring some peace to him, and selfishly, maybe to me for the coming night. But another question nagged at me. Where had Thomas gone? Did he ever face consequences or live out his life free of guilt? The documents hadn't said. That mystery remained unsolved. A part of me wished I could find out what became of him, though it was likely outside the scope of local records since he left. Maybe he changed his name, started anew somewhere. The thought that he might have lived happily after destroying his family made my blood boil. As the sun began to lower, I gathered up the papers. I placed Catherine's and Elijah's death notices side by side. Mother and child, bound in fate, and Thomas absent from both. Without really thinking, I spoke aloud into the empty dining room. "Don't worry, Elijah. I'm here for you. I know what happened. You deserved so much better." My words faded into the quiet. I stood still, listening. Nothing. With a sigh, I started to clean up when a soft thump sounded from above, like something small falling to the floor. It came from directly overhead, likely the master bedroom. I froze, listening hard. Was someone up there? Or had a breeze knocked something over? I decided to investigate. In the daylight, I felt brave. I even left my flashlight behind as I ascended the stairs with determined strides. Entering the master bedroom, I immediately noticed something different. On the floor by the foot of the bed lay a single sheet of folded, yellowed paper that I swear had not been there earlier when I cleaned the room. I had tidied a bit, mainly opening the window a crack and picking up that toy top, placing it back on the nightstand. I was certain I would have seen this paper then. I approached and picked it up. The paper was brittle and discoloured with age, and it had been neatly folded in half. My heart began to pound as I carefully opened it. It was a letter, written in brownish ink that had faded but was still legible. The date at the top, April 4th, 1874, just 2 days after Catherine's death. My eyes raced over the words. "To whom it may concern, I, Thomas Walker, do hereby renounce my claim to Briar Glen. I cannot bear to remain in this place after the loss of my dear wife. I entrust my son Elijah to the care of my sister-in-law, Margaret Reed, until such time as I can send for him. I am leaving Georgia to seek a new beginning and to escape the shadows that haunt me here. May God and my son one day forgive me for my failings. T. Walker." The letter was not addressed to a person, more like a statement or unsent note. Perhaps he intended it as a letter of intent for lawyers, or it was a private confession he never delivered. The language was formal, but what struck me was the line, "Escape the shadows that haunt me," and the plea for forgiveness from his son. I had to sit on the edge of the bed as I processed it. Thomas's words sounded remorseful on the surface, yet how convenient of him to run away rather than face what he'd done. If anything, the letter made me despise him more. And heartbreakingly, it seemed he never did send for Elijah as he wrote, if he truly intended to at all. But more immediate than my judgment of a long-dead man was the realization I had not found this letter on my own. Elijah, or something in the house, had placed it in my path. Maybe he, or even Catherine's spirit, wanted me to read it, to know that Thomas left in guilt. As I sat on the dusty quilt, I felt a slight depression beside me, as if someone small had climbed onto the bed. The mattress faintly shifted under the weight. I dared not move. The late afternoon sun coming through the window fell just short of the bed, so I saw nothing there, but I felt it, a presence at my side. My throat tightened with emotion. Carefully, I spoke into the empty air, voice trembling. "Elijah, is that you?" The mattress shifted again, a gentle tug on the quilt as though a child was crawling closer. A tendril of the lavender scent wound around me. I found out what happened to you, I continued, almost in a whisper. I know you miss your mama, and I know your papa. I know he hurt her. You didn't deserve any of it. You both were innocent. The air felt cold beside me, but I also felt strangely comforted, like an approving calm. My eyes stung with tears that I let fall. You're not forgotten, Elijah. I'm here. I hear you. For a moment the house was utterly silent. Then a warmth touched my hand, a small hand pressing into mine, briefly, just a sensation without form. It was as fleeting as a sigh. I gasped softly, not from fear, but from the surge of compassion and uncanny awe that flooded me. And just like that, the presence receded. The bed's weight shifted back to normal. I realized I was shaking, tears rolling down my cheeks. It felt as if I had just made contact with the boy's ghost in a gentle way for the first time. Clutching the old letter, I made a vow right then. I would stay tonight, and as long as it took to let Elijah's spirit tell his story. If he was indeed a poltergeist, I would endure it. If he was angry, I would face that anger. He deserved to have someone bear witness to his pain, and with hope help release it. Even as I resolved this, I couldn't shake one line from Thomas's letter, to escape the shadows that haunt me here. What did he mean? His guilt? Or something else? I folded the letter carefully and put it in my notebook with the other papers. The sun was setting now, filling the bedroom with golden light. It was time to prepare for nightfall. It would be a long night, I suspected, perhaps the most intense yet. But this time, I felt Elijah might listen to me. I only hoped I was right, and that whatever anger or pain dwelled alongside him in Briar Glen would allow me to help rather than destroy me in the attempt. As twilight bled into night, I steeled myself for whatever would come. After the encounter on the bed with Elijah's gentle presence, I felt a cautious optimism that perhaps tonight would be different, more communion than terror. But as every journalist and ghost hunter knows, expectations can be upended in an instant. I prepared by placing a few candles around the parlour and hallway, unlit but ready. I double-checked my voice recorder and camera, though capturing evidence was now secondary to me. My primary goal was to reach Elijah. I kept the photo of the Walker family and the copies of the journal entries close by, thinking they might help me communicate. And though I hoped I wouldn't need it, I put my grandmother's rosary in my pocket. Not for an exorcism, but for comfort and perhaps protection if things went awry. By 9 p.m, the house was fully dark. The cicadas had quieted, leaving an almost oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional call of a whip-poor-will in the distance. I decided to conduct a kind of vigil in the master bedroom, since that was clearly the heart of the haunting. With lantern and flashlight in hand, I ascended the stairs yet again, feeling a flutter of nerves in my gut. The master bedroom greeted me with stillness. The air felt heavy, as though saturated with unseen energy. I placed the lantern on the dresser, its flame casting a soft golden circle in the centre of the room, leaving the edges in shadow. I lit 2 candles and set them on the floor by the bed, their flames steady, no wind, no draughts. Standing at the foot of that antique bed, I took a steadying breath and spoke into the quiet. Elijah, I said gently, the name feeling both strange and familiar on my tongue. I know you're here. It's me, Emily. I learned about what happened to you, to your mama. I'm so sorry. My voice wavered a bit, echoing. I waited, ears straining. At first, nothing but the silence answered. Then I felt it. A chill creeping across the room. The candle flames shivered and bent as if a breeze passed, though I felt none on my skin. Encouraged, I continued. I know you've been waiting a long time for someone to listen. You've been angry, haven't you? You had every right to be. My eyes swept the room slowly. If you can hear me, if you can see me, I want you to know that your story won't be forgotten. What your father did... A sudden clatter interrupted me. On the nightstand, the little wooden spinning top toppled over and rolled, then fell to the floor as if knocked by an unseen hand. I flinched at the abrupt movement, but tried to keep calm. The temperature plummeted further. My breath came out in a misty puff. I had the impression that someone stood just behind me. The hairs on my neck rose. Carefully, I lowered myself to sit on the edge of the mattress, adopting a posture of openness rather than fear. Elijah, it's okay. You can show yourself, or do what you need to. I'm not here to hurt you, I promise. For a long moment, there was nothing. I almost began to doubt that anything would happen when I heard the soft patter of footsteps on the landing outside the door. Small, light steps, as of a child. They approached the threshold, then stopped. I looked toward the open doorway. In the gloom beyond, the shadows seemed to coalesce, forming a vaguely child-sized silhouette. My heart thundered in my chest. The figure did not enter the room, but I felt its gaze, invisible yet intense. Gently, I picked up the family photograph from beside me and held it out, speaking softly. "Elijah, I found your picture today. See? This is you with your mama and papa." The silhouette flickered and I heard a faint rustling as if someone shifting their feet. I placed the photo on the bed. "Your mama loved you very much. I read how you cried for her, how you missed her." My voice choked up despite my intentions. Tears pricked my eyes again. "She would be so proud of you, Elijah. And she's waiting for you." At that, a moan drifted through the air, a child's soft, sobbing moan. The shadowy figure moved into the doorway. For the first time I saw a bit of him, a pale form peeking around the doorframe. The features were indistinct, but I glimpsed the curve of a cheek, an eye reflecting candlelight, a little boy, maybe 7 years old, with dark curls hanging over his forehead. Exactly as in the photo, but translucent and grey. My breath caught. I forced myself to speak calmly, though inside I was trembling. "Hi there," I whispered, smiling through tears. "It's okay. You can come in." The boy's ghost stepped hesitantly into the room. As he did, the candle's flames drew tall, nearly extinguishing, and then steadied. He stood a few feet from me, wearing what looked like short trousers and suspenders, a little old-fashioned shirt, clothes of the 1870s, I realised. His face, I could see it more clearly now. Smooth, pale skin, round cheeks, those sorrowful eyes. He looked at the photograph on the bed and then at me. I dared not move too suddenly. Slowly, I pushed the photo a bit closer to him across the quilt. "That's you," I said softly. "And that's your mama, Catherine. She's beautiful." He took another step. I could see the outline of the opposite wall right through his small form. He was faint, like a hologram or a reflection in water. He reached out towards the photograph. His hand, or what I perceived as his hand, hovered above it. The photo quivered and then lifted just an inch or two off the blanket, as if guided by invisible fingertips. He was touching it. A faint smile seemed to pass over his face, then quickly crumpled into an expression of pain. The photograph fell from its hover, and Elijah's ghost emitted a keening wail so sharp and despairing that I clamped my hands over my ears. The sound wasn't loud in decibels, but it pierced directly into my heart, a child's pure anguish. "Elijah," I cried out, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." His form flickered violently, like a candle about to gutter out. Then, to my alarm, objects in the room began to shake. The vanity mirror rattled against the wall. The armoire door swung open and shut with a bang. The wooden cradle in the corner slid 2 inches across the floor on its own. The poltergeist was back in force, his sorrow tipping into rage. I stood up slowly, trying to remain composed as adrenaline surged. "Elijah, please, listen to me." I had to shout over a sudden cacophony. The light bulb in the overhead chandelier began to buzz and flicker, the metal bed frame itself shuddering. "I know you're hurt. You have every right to be. What your father did was terrible. He was a bad man." At that, the wailing stopped abruptly. The ghost's form, which had been flickering, solidified just a bit, and those eyes locked onto mine. I realised with a jolt that perhaps I had just confirmed what he suspected or needed to hear, that his father was indeed to blame. His tiny face contorted, and suddenly, with a burst of energy, a heavy book flew off the dresser toward me. I ducked, and it smashed against the wall, sending pages fluttering. Then an unseen force yanked the rug beneath my feet, toppling me to my knees. I hit the floor with a jarring thud, panic flaring. He was lashing out now, perhaps seeing me as an enemy or just overwhelmed. The door to the room slammed shut of its own accord, just as it had the night before. I was effectively sealed in with the storm of Elijah's fury. From my knees, I raised my hands in a placating gesture. "Elijah, it's Emily, remember? I'm your friend," I shouted. The dresser next to me groaned, wood straining. Was he about to tip it over on me? The entire house seemed to quake with psychic force. Downstairs, I heard a distant crash, perhaps a piece of furniture thrown. Above me, the chandelier tinkled violently. The boy's apparition flickered faster, as if torn between appearing and vanishing. And then I saw something that truly terrified me. Elijah's form blurred and shifted, and for a split second, it wasn't the little boy standing there, but a tall, gaunt silhouette of a man, broad-shouldered, with a hint of a moustache on a spectral face twisted in rage. Thomas. I knew it instinctively. It was as if Elijah's pain had summoned an echo of his father, or perhaps Elijah was projecting that image to show me his anger toward Thomas. The figure's eyes were dark hollows in the flickering candlelight, and it lurched towards me. "No!" I screamed, scrambling back against the bed as the apparition of Thomas advanced. The phantom's mouth opened unnaturally wide in a silent howl. In that moment, pure fear overtook me. I felt as though I were Catherine, seeing her husband come at her in that final moment of life. My chest constricted and I realised I had actually stopped breathing out of terror. The ghostly figure, child or father or both, lunged. An unseen force seized my throat. I felt pressure, cold and vice-like, around my neck. I gasped, clutching at empty air as I was lifted off my knees. Elijah's rage had taken tangible form and it was choking me. Spots danced in my vision as I struggled. Somewhere in my panicked mind, a thought flickered. He thinks I'm Thomas. Perhaps in his fury, the lines had blurred and he was reenacting that violence. I managed to croak out, voice strangled. "Eli! Stop! I'm not him!" Hot tears streamed down my face. I was getting dizzy, my limbs flailing uselessly. In desperation, I fumbled in my pocket and pulled out the rosary. I wasn't sure what I intended, pray, break the attack, something. The beads glinted and caught the ghost's eye, or at least it seemed. For a split second, the grip on my neck loosened as the apparition's gaze flickered to the rosary. In that brief respite, I sucked in a breath and then, summoning strength from sheer will, I yelled out, "Thomas is gone, Elijah! He can't hurt you anymore!" My words rang out and seemed to hang in the air. The pressure around my neck vanished and I collapsed onto the floor, coughing and sobbing. Before me, the ghostly man flickered, then shrank back down into the form of the child. Elijah stood there, his face contorted in a mix of fury and grief, tiny hands clenched into fists. He stared at me, and I realised he looked conflicted, as if not fully understanding what he had just done. Gasping for air, I held up the rosary not as a threat, but as a token. "Your mama's with God, Elijah," I rasped out. "She's waiting for you. She loves you. Don't let your papa keep hurting you or anyone anymore." He took a step back, wavering. I crawled toward him, sore and desperate to reach the child behind the wrath. From the bed, one of the candles toppled and went out, casting new shadows, but I ignored everything except the little ghost before me. "Elijah," I pleaded softly now, voice raw, "it's not your fault. None of it was your fault, sweetheart." He blinked at me, and for an instant I saw a different expression. Innocence, confusion. His lips moved silently, as if he was trying to speak or cry. No sound came out, but tears, ethereal silvery tears, rolled down his cheeks. The sight undid me. I wanted to gather him in my arms, but of course I couldn't. Instead, I reached out one hand slowly, palm up, inviting. To my wonder, he reached out too. His small ghostly hand hovered above mine, and I felt that chill, that tingling, as his essence pressed against my skin. I closed my fingers as if I could hold his hand. Perhaps I imagined it, but I thought I felt a tiny squeeze. "I forgive you," I whispered to him, not even knowing if a child ghost needed forgiveness, but sensing he carried guilt as well, for being the inadvertent cause of his mother's death by existing, for not saving her, for his anger. "And your mama, I know she forgives you too, Elijah. She wants you to be with her." He looked toward the window as if hearing something far off. I sensed another presence then, a gentle warmth spreading through the icy room. The scent of lavender grew stronger, but without the rot this time, just pure and sweet. The air by the doorway shimmered, and I saw a soft outline like a white glowing shape of a woman. Catherine. The shape slowly moved closer. I could not see details, but I felt an overwhelming wave of love emanating from that spirit. The boy must have felt it too, because he let go of my hand and turned towards it, a hopeful yearning in his expression. "Mommy?" The word was a whisper, delicate as a sigh, yet I heard it clear as day in the quiet. The luminous figure extended what looked like arms. Elijah's ghost took a tentative step, then rushed forward. As he did, his form began to shine too, brightening and losing its defined edges. The two shapes, mother and child, met just a few feet from me, and I swear I heard a soft sob of joy. From him? From her, they embraced a blur of light and gentle energy. I watched in silent awe, tears on my face, as the combined glow grew brighter for a moment. The candles all blew out, yet the room was lit by that warm glow. My eyes burned from the brilliance, but I didn't dare blink, afraid to lose a second of this miracle. I could just make out the little head against the taller figure's chest, the mother cradling her son at last. "Thank you," a woman's voice whispered, as soft as the brush of silk. It echoed not in my ears, but in my heart. Then, as quickly as it came, the light began to fade. I found myself reaching out, wanting to hold on to that moment, but it dimmed gently, like a receding sunset. In the darkness, a few stray sparkles of light drifted upward towards the ceiling and vanished. The bedroom plunged into darkness, lit only by the weak glow of the lantern on the dresser. The air was suddenly still and warm, the cold spots had vanished. The oppressive weight of the atmosphere was gone, replaced by a lightness and emptiness. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out in a shaky exhale. My entire body was trembling from adrenaline, from the fading remnants of fear, and from profound relief. I knew in my heart that Elijah and Catherine were gone from this place, moved on, together. I sat there on the floor beside the bed and wept, out of sadness and joy mingled together. Sadness for the years they lost, the pain they endured, and joy that, at long last, they had found each other again and hopefully some measure of peace. It was over. The haunting of Briar Glen, at least the one that had menaced me, was over. Eventually exhaustion overtook emotion. I managed to stand and make my way downstairs. Oddly, the house that had once felt so menacing now felt empty, like any other old abandoned dwelling. No thumps, no chills, no watching eyes, just silence. I slept on the parlour floor for a few hours from sheer collapse, dreamless and deep. When dawn's light angled through the dusty windows, I awoke and packed my things. In the morning stillness, I walked through the house one last time. The master bedroom was tranquil, dust motes dancing in sunbeams. I touched the bedpost where my dusty handprint from the first day remained, now joined by another smaller print in dust that I swear hadn't been there before, just beside mine, as if a small hand had been placed next to where mine had been. Elijah's hand, perhaps. I pressed my palm over that tiny print, saying a silent goodbye. "Rest well, little one," I murmured. As I closed the front door of Briar Glen behind me, I felt a profound sense of completion. The weight I hadn't realised I was carrying on my shoulders lifted. The morning chorus of birds was loud and vibrant. The sky was a brilliant blue. Even the old house, with its peeling paint and lonely facade, looked a touch less gloomy in the light of a new day. I locked the door and slid the iron key back under the mat for Mrs. Dalton to find later. I suspected by the time she returned, Briar Glen would seem much changed to her, even if she couldn't put her finger on how. I loaded my gear into the car, taking one last look at the house and the overgrown yard. My eyes lingered on an upstairs window, the master bedroom window. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw a flicker of movement there, a shape of a little boy waving. But it might have been nothing, just a curtain stirring in a breeze, or perhaps a farewell from a grateful spirit. Either way, I smiled and waved back. My vision blurred with tears for just a second, and when I wiped them away, the window was empty. "Goodbye, Elijah," I whispered. "Be free." I started the engine and drove down the dirt lane, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror. I did not look back again. I wanted to remember that fleeting image of him at the window, real or not, rather than the decades of darkness that had preceded it. What I didn't know then was that Briar Glen had one more revelation in store for me, one last haunting truth that would send a final shiver through my soul, even in the bright light of day. It was a full week before I truly grasped the final twist of my time at Briar Glen. In the days after, I poured everything I had into writing the article, no, the book, perhaps, that the story demanded. I recounted the history of the Walker family, the haunting, and how the restless spirit of a little boy named Elijah finally found peace. It was cathartic, putting the words down, knowing I was giving voice to Catherine and Elijah at last. Yet something gnawed at me. One loose end remained, Thomas Walker. What became of him after he fled? Part of me wanted him to have met some miserable end as penance, but I had no evidence either way. And then there was a creeping, unsettling thought that began to surface as I sifted through the notes. Why had I, of all people, felt so compelled to seek out this story? Was it mere chance, or something more? Late one night, I found myself at my desk, surrounded by newspaper clippings and photocopies. Thomas's unsent letter lay before me, the one I'd found miraculously on the bedroom floor. I reread his florid script, especially the line about leaving Georgia to seek a new beginning. Where would a man like him have gone? Perhaps to a city where a newcomer wouldn't be noticed. Savannah? Charleston? On a hunch, I dug into some genealogical databases and historical records, searching for any Thomas or T. Walker in those areas after 1874. Nothing obvious turned up. But then I recalled the deed ledger showing Elias Walker owning Briar Glen in 1876, likely Elijah, misspelled. If Elijah legally inherited after Thomas was declared gone, maybe Thomas had legally declared himself dead or changed identity. The idea sent a small chill through me. If Thomas truly wanted to escape his past, he might have changed his name entirely. But to what? I stared at the letter again. Thomas mentioned his sister-in-law, Margaret Reed. If he wanted total separation, perhaps he wouldn't take a name connected to his wife's family. Maybe he chose something from his own family background, a name that wouldn't raise suspicion. My eyes drifted to the signature, T. Walker. The way he wrote the T, it reminded me of something. I grabbed one of my notebooks, where I'd scribbled observations during my research at the courthouse. Flipping through, I found a page where I had jotted down, almost absent-mindedly, my own family tree back when I first started the assignment. My father's side had roots in South Carolina, I knew, but the details were hazy. My grandmother had once shown me an old family Bible listing ancestors. One name on my tree leapt out now, Thomas Renner, born 1835, died 1908. He would have been a contemporary of Thomas Walker. I remembered Grandma saying Thomas Renner had come from somewhere in Georgia as a young man and settled in Charleston after the war, starting our family line there. At the time it seemed a mundane fact. Now it felt like a lead weight dropping in my stomach. Renner, my last name. Heart-pounding. I cross-referenced online archives for any mention of a Renner in Georgia pre-1874. It was a long shot, but after an hour of digging through census records, I found something. A listing in the 1860 census for Thomas W. Renner in Atlanta, age 25. Atlanta, not far from central Georgia. Could this be a coincidence? Did Thomas Walker adopt the surname Renner later? Or was it a name already in his family? Perhaps more telling was what I discovered next, a marriage announcement in a Charleston newspaper from 1877. It read, Thomas W. Renner of Georgia weds Amelia Frost of Charleston. The timing, the first name W, as middle initial, Walker perhaps. A swirl of emotions hit me as I realized the likelihood. This Thomas Renner was my great-great-grandfather, and all signs pointed to him actually being Thomas Walker, having shed his old identity. I sat back feeling dizzy. If this was true, then the blood of that bad man coursed down through generations to me. I was kin to the villain of the tale I had so passionately and naively thought I was an outside observer to. A disturbing memory surfaced, the way the ghostly apparition of Thomas had looked at me in that house, how Elijah's rage had nearly strangled me. Could he have sensed it, even subconsciously? That I carried his father's blood? Perhaps that was why the poltergeist's fury had been so intense with me, and also why fate, or something beyond, had drawn me to Briar Glen, to atone for that old sin written in my DNA. I pushed away from the desk and went to the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection as if searching for signs of Thomas in my features. I had my mother's eyes, but my jawline, my smile, could those have been his? The thought made me feel faintly ill. In that mirror, for just a moment, I imagined I saw another face overlaying mine, a flicker of a stern man with a mustache, eyes dark with secrets. I blinked and it was just me, pale and wide-eyed, my mind playing tricks, no doubt, or perhaps a fragment of ghostly memory implanted in me. Returning to my desk, I looked at the family photo of the Walkers, the one Mr. Withers had given me. Catherine's kind face, Elijah's shy smile, and Thomas, that stern posture and inscrutable expression. How uncanny that I had felt a tug of familiarity when I first saw it. Now I understood why. I set the photograph next to one of my own family, a faded shot of my grandmother and her father, my great-grandfather. There it was, a resemblance between my great-grandfather's eyes and Thomas's. It was subtle, but now that I looked for it, I couldn't unsee it. My stomach churned. I wasn't sure whether to feel horrified, guilty, or simply stunned. By helping Elijah's ghost find peace, had I in some way made amends for my ancestors' crime? Or was I presumptuous to think that could ever be enough? The sins of the father, would they ever truly wash away from the bloodline? I went back to Briar Glen 2 days later, unable to resist seeing it one more time with this new knowledge in hand. It was midday when I arrived, the house locked and quiet. Mrs. Dalton had placed a for sale sign out front now, perhaps emboldened by the fact that no further disturbances had occurred since my stay. She'd mentioned on the phone that a couple of potential buyers even toured the house and found it charming, if a bit old-fashioned, an amusing understatement. I stood at the gate, fingers resting on the rusty iron. I didn't need to go inside. I simply regarded the old facade. My family's secret history was entwined in those timbers and bricks. The thought made my skin prickle. "I helped him," I murmured, not sure if I was seeking forgiveness or reassurance. The breeze picked up, rustling the overgrown briars along the fence. For a moment, I thought I smelled a hint of lavender on the air, clean and sweet. A butterfly flitted past and vanished among the weeds. I closed my eyes and in my mind imagined Catherine and Elijah somewhere far beyond, safe and happy, and Thomas, well, whatever afterlife he earned, I hoped he was paying his dues. Opening my eyes, I realized I was crying silently. Perhaps part of it was relief, for Elijah's sake and maybe for my own. The burden of the past had shifted. I would carry the knowledge of my lineage as a private spectre, a caution, a mystery to ponder for the rest of my life. But I also carried the memory of a little boy's cold hand growing warm in mine, of a ghostly mother's love filling a room with light, and of the moment a century-old nightmare finally came to an end. Those were things I would never publish, never fully explain to anyone. They were mine alone, a bond between me and the spirits of Briar Glen. As I turned to leave, I took one last look at the weathered house and spoke softly, a vow into the balmy Georgia air. "I'll remember. Elijah, I'll remember you." The word caught in my throat. Family. Indeed, by a twist of fate and blood, the boy's tragic story was part of my own. That was the final haunting of Briar Glen, not rattling chains or phantom touches, but the inescapable truth that some part of me would forever be connected to this place and its ghosts. I left Briar Glen with the sun on my face, walking forward into my own life even as I carried the echoes of that dark, old drama within me. The past can reach out in uncanny ways, but it's what we do with its revelations that matters. I chose to bear witness and to remember. In doing so, perhaps I had made a small offering of peace, not just for Elijah's soul, but for the troubled legacy of my family. And though the nightmares may still visit me some nights, the cries of a child, the slam of a door, the weight of unseen eyes, I take comfort in knowing that love ultimately triumphed over rage in that house. The bitter cycle was broken. Briar Glen's spirits were at rest. Still, in my quieter moments, I cannot help but feel a chill. I think of a scared little boy and the monstrous act that set all this in motion, and I wonder, do the dead ever really let us go? Or do they live on in our very blood, waiting for the day we finally see them staring back at us in the mirror? In my case, I have my answer, and it will haunt me gently for all my days. Some houses forget, but Briar Glen remembers, and so do I. Its ghosts may have found peace, but their story lingers, etched into the walls, into the blood, into me. I came searching for a haunting, and discovered my own. Some spirits don't want to be freed. They want to be found.
Every story has an end, but here the mysteries never stop. Thank you for watching and being a part of this journey into the unknown. Your support keeps these stories alive, and there's plenty more waiting for you. We drop 3 new stories every week, so if you crave suspense, the unexplained and the downright chilling, make sure you're subscribed and ready for what's next. Until then, keep your lights on, your doors locked, and remember, some stories stay with you long after they're told.